So we actually have someone here who actually already knows quite a bit about EMDR, so I would love it if you would kind of give us, before we start, your overview of what you believe EMDR is. And that we'll kind of work from that, since you already have a little bit of background in that.
Oh, you want me to start now?
Yeah, if you don't mind, just kind of let everyone know what your experience is with it, what kind of problems it solves, and what it is.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Love to have you up here.
So just to let you know that the training is pretty intense. It's 2 full weekends where you're Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, like 8 to 5 or something. So you're talking about a lot of training. And the neat thing about the way I like to describe it to clients is it doesn't take away the memory, but it changes your view of that memory. And it was basically developed for PTSD, you know, from war and that sort of thing. So, like, some examples are a person could, you know, say someone from the war, his best friend died in his arms, you know, in the war, and he's feeling it was his fault. He should have saved him in 7 nightmares. Well, with EMDR, you can change your views so that you don't have the negative. Yes, he died, but it was fortunate that I was there with him. Or someone that's raped, and, you know, rather than the negative, it was my fault, I was drunk, blah, blah, blah. You go away saying, I've become empowered. I'm better than that. And it's really dramatic. When it works, I've had 2 really good examples. One where she was in her 20s, and she was a paramedic, not a paramedic, but EMT, and so she was used to emergency medicine. And she watched her dad die of a heart attack. She wasn't able to save him. And she was living with her. She was so traumatized by that, she had panic attacks and was not able to work. She couldn't work. She couldn't go to school. She had to quit paramedic school. And we worked twice a week for, I don't know, 6 months, or I forget how long. And now she's working full time, and she signed up for paramedic school. And she's able to manage. She still has some, you know, she used to not be able to drive to the mall because she would have a panic attack on the car. I mean, she was really pretty debilitated. And so that was pretty dramatic. And then another one, she had this itching. And I don't know what it was from, I can't quite remember. But she'd actually made an emergency appointment for a dermatologist, and happens that the appointment with me was prior to that, like an hour before. And I just did 1 session of EMDR, the itching went away. I mean, 1 hour. And she went to the dermatologist. I said, here, take my business cards and pass them out at the put him out of business. Yeah, and awesome. Several months later, it was still gone. So, like when it works out, and I've had some cases where it just wasn't effective. And I don't know whether that client, it's a very strange thing. It's, you know, when you're looking at going back and forth, looking at someone's fingers, that's kind of a weird thing that, you know, might be out of their comfort zone. So, or they may be not ready to change, because it's pretty, I've had it done on me, and it can be pretty intense. You have to be willing to go through the pain to get to the healing.
That's a pretty good way of putting it, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that means and what that entails. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's awesome. So, everybody give her a hand. Thank you for sharing that with us. If anybody does share, we're going to be very supportive, anything like that. How many people are here primarily because you want to help others with this type of therapy or treatment? And how many people are here because you know someone, or you personally have some sort of past that you'd like to deal with and like some help with? Okay, awesome. So we're pretty well divided on that, and we are going to cover both areas of that today. Most modalities in therapy deal with the actual events and the details, okay? All 3 of the modalities that we will be learning today don't focus primarily there. So traditional focuses on the details of the events as they are believed to have happened to the individual. Today we will be dealing with the emotions and the tactile sensations that you experience from a memory, from a trauma, from something like that. So rather than dealing with the details of the event, the therapist, the clinician, will be focused on the emotions that you experience when thinking about the event and the tactile sensations that you feel in your body. Does everyone know what a tactile sensation is in your body? Okay, so does everyone remember that feeling on Christmas morning whenever you're running down the stairs and you're excited to see the Christmas presents? Does everyone feel an energy on the inside of you, like in your chest? That's what we would refer to as a tactile sensation. That would be a positive tactile sensation, something that you feel, that's a good thing.
A negative one would be like,
a heaviness in the
recall
chest.
something like a loss or a stressful event, or you got a bad grade on a test and you think about that and then you feel that on the inside, like that your stomach starts churning, and that's the tactile
most
sensation
people that have
associated with the
experienced,
negative event.
absolutely, most people that have experienced some form of PTSD, some sort of past trauma, have a negative tactile sensation that they feel in their body. We're going to be dealing with some of that with EMDR, NLP, and the Havening technique. And so what we're focused on more is the experience that the person's having, their emotions and their tactile sensations, more so than we're focused on the details of the event that led up to that. Does everyone get that? So in your traditional therapies, you're actually talk therapies, you're dealing with the specific details as they pertain to the patient, to the client. Whenever you're dealing with these modalities, you're not focused on the details. In fact, they may not even have to tell you the details. You may never know the event that happened to this person. Does that make sense? And you don't need to. And you're gonna have to really fight that clinician, that therapeutic side of you that wants to get in there and wants to help them get into the details, because they may not need it with this type of modality. They may be able to get over that past event just dealing with the emotions and the tactile sensations and getting those minimized, getting dissociated from those feeling so intensive and so first person. Okay? So that's the primary thing that I want you to recognize about these modalities versus your traditional therapies, that's what these are focused on. So if you have clients that don't necessarily want to revisit those old facts and details and want to do it in a different way, this works really well for those types of clients and those types of patients, okay? People that don't want to necessarily relive that in specific detail every time to try to get over it, okay?
So starting at the beginning, because everyone in here isn't a clinician, I guess we should explain what EMDR stands for.
Absolutely. So let's get right into the material. If everyone wants to open up to the first page, it's highlighted right there. That's the acronym. And does anybody want to tell me what that acronym is, that first highlighted portion?
I move with desensitization and reprocessing.
That's right, desensitization and reprocessing. It's a big mouthful, so that's why you see that it's been brought down to EMDR, right? So everyone sees that EMDR. What is it that first comes to your mind when you think eye movement, desensitization, and reprocessing? What comes to your mind?
Sleep.
What's that?
Sleep,
And why?
because we know that your eye movement changes during sleep.
That's right, what's that called?
Rapid eye movement.
Rapid eye movement, right? And what is it believed that's happening during that process of rapid eye movement?
Dreaming.
You're dreaming, right? And so your visual cortex is lit up, you're having these visuals go through your mind, and they're vivid a lot of times in great detail. So what happens is the reason that your mind does that is because our mind organizes visuals by moving our eyes and organizing things in our brain. So when someone is reliving an experience, a past trauma, chances are their eyes are gonna go one direction in order to recall that. That's where the brain has organized that. So by inducing rapid eye movement, the bilateral movements, you're engaging the left and right hemispheres in a way that typically the brain did not recall that memory. So the brain had a way of organizing that past trauma, that past event, a way that the eyes like to go, a way that the mind likes to think of the sounds, likes to think of the imagery, and so the eyes go a certain direction. What we're doing is we're forcing bilateral movement across both hemispheres to where now the brain cannot process it in that specific way that it did originally. So it starts to create new coping mechanisms and new ways of understanding and processing that old memory, okay? And the reason that we do that is because it's desensitization. It's changing the way that the brain organized that original memory, okay? And using eye movement to do that. It is an 8-phase process, and that is sometimes takes more than one session to get through all 8 phases. And that's why a lot of times this therapy is thought of to be a much more rapid therapy than traditional. At least that's the way it's been advertised, is that it can be a lot faster. However, if you don't get through all 8 phases in that first session, chances are they're going to need more than one session for sure, okay? Because you definitely have to get through the 8, and the 8th one is whenever you've completed the entire therapy, okay?
I just want to jump in real quick, just to associate how the eyes move when people think about something. Really good magicians do this, and so when they have you look at a card, before they like read your mind and tell you what card you're thinking about, they're going to ask you questions and have you think of like, you know, the color red or the color black. And the really good ones, they see which directions your eye moves, and so that's how they're able to eliminate, you know, which suit it is, which number it is, and that's how they're able to do that, because they are so in tune with watching the directions that people's eyes move. And it's not the same for every person, so that's why they have to figure it out specifically for that person when they're thinking certain things, which direction their eye moves, and then that's how they're able to, by process of elimination, figure that out.
He's absolutely right. I practice a little bit of stage mentalism and things of that nature, and we utilize what we learn in eye movements and eye accessing cues in order to do a lot of what we do. So it is true. Where your eyes move gives away a lot of what you're thinking, how you're thinking, and why you're thinking it. So just so you know, that's part of what we'll be getting into today, is a little bit about why that bilateral movement of the eyes, why that matters. We will get into a script a little bit here about neurolinguistic programming and about how people create images in their mind, things that they like, things that they dislike, and we'll start talking a lot about that, okay? So I'm not going to read through all of this. This is here for you. However, if you do want to go down to section 1.1 and fill in, I have highlighted the portions that are most important. EMDR is an acronym for what? We've already said it: eye movement, desensitization, and reprocessing. EMDR is based upon Shapiro's adaptive processing model, and that's Francine Shapiro. She's the creator of this modality, okay? Which posits that EMDR therapy facilitates the accessing and processing. So we are going to access and process, okay, traumatic memories and other adverse life experience to bring these to an adaptive resolution, okay? So the whole purpose of this, the whole goal of this, is to bring this past trauma, this past memory, to an adaptive resolution. And so that person is adapted to their circumstances, to their future, to those types of things, okay? All right, moving right along. During EMDR therapy, the client attends to emotionally disturbing material, okay?
So they're recalling that traumatic event that they have an emotional response to that they don't like.
And they do that in brief, sequential doses, while simultaneously focusing on an external stimulus, okay? And that external stimulus is going to be directed by you or by some sort of computer program, some sort of auditory signal. There's all sorts of ways that they've been able to add this in, whether the person is kinesthetic. They've got these clickers that you can put that buzz in your hands. If you really get into this, there are all sorts of different ways that you can stimulate bilateral movement, okay?
One quick example of that is they've done research and found that with people in the military who have PTSD from the traumatic events that they've experienced in like wartime and stuff, they found that if they actually play like those violent war video games, that actually helps, because they are focusing on an external event, but it's similar enough that it's recalling the traumatic event for them, but their mind realizes that the video game's not real. And so it shifts it from that traumatic event and helps resolve that.
Because they're still using their hands to do it, but then the disconnection from that not being real actually helps them cope with whenever it was real, and it was their hands doing it, okay? So going on down, EMDR therapy facilitates the accessing of traumatic memory network, okay? So what you're doing is the brain has a network. It has a series of events that happens to recall that past trauma, that PTSD, whatever it is. It has a network that leads up to all of the emotions so that the brain knows how to recall it, where it is, what it is, so it doesn't forget it, okay? And it goes into our long-term memory. We're accessing that network. So that information processing is enhanced with new associations. By adding in those bilateral eye movements, by adding in new things, we're adding in new associations for that person. And prior to the bilateral movements, one of the things that we will get from the client, from the person we're working with, is a positive thought or affirmation about themselves that they want to feel, that they want to have as a new association when they're finished with this therapy. So one of the things that they're focused on is that new association, okay?
So one of the analogies that I've heard describing that network is like, it's like a hill in your brain with like a ditch dug into it, and it's water like flowing down the hill. And so when you're creating these new associations, it's like digging a different ditch so that the water flows down a different pathway, so that you don't lead to the same end result of that, experiencing the emotions along with that recall of that traumatic event.
Absolutely. We want a different set of associations that go through the mind, and the mind to go through a different process, okay? So, and then that's the new association forged between the traumatic memory, that's the next line, and more adaptive memories or information. So we want to create a new network that's forged between, a new association forged between the traumatic memory and more adaptive memories or information. So we want to introduce adaptive memories and information, okay? All right, so I'm going to have Kneale talk a little bit about the three-pronged EMDR, using the three-pronged protocol, the past events that have laid the groundwork, the current circumstances, and the imaginal templates of future events. So if you'd like to talk a little bit about the three prongs that we focus on.
So we've already kind of touched on them a little bit, but we talked about the past events that laid the dysfunction, laid the foundation for the dysfunction. So there's the past event, it's traumatic to the person. They have, when they think of it or something triggers it, the recall of that, the memory of that event, that dysfunction is processed. And what we're doing is we're trying to forge new pathways, new links in the brain with adaptive information to get that to change. So that leads into the second one, and it talks about the current circumstances and the internal and external triggers. So something in your external environment may recall that event for you, like James was talking about earlier. You have that thought, and then that's expressed in your body. You have like a physical sensation and stuff internally, or it can even just be an internal thought that you have. You think of something, you recall something, and then it leads to bringing up that memory. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to make those triggers get desensitized, so that when your brain goes there or has those thoughts or whatever, it doesn't lead to the emotion that you're not wanting to experience. And then the third one, we're talking about future events that are incorporated into the imagery, and that's to help the client or the person who's over processing, so that it gets resolved so that they can function adaptively.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great, Kneale. Thank you. So as they begin to do the therapy in real time, and they're starting to desensitize from those emotional states and those feelings that they're having, we also at that time want to start to give them those tools to apply to future circumstances. So as they begin to imagine their future and going on from this place from here on out, how do you see that playing out the next time? And so that they're having adaptive now templates in their mind to where they're putting themselves forward in time and conquering or overcoming what used to be a real traumatic trigger. So we're giving that to them in a way that's imagining it, giving them the tools right now in real time in therapy.
And that's just something that a lot of therapists do just in general, not even necessarily working with trauma, but with your role playing. You role play a situation with your client that have been succeeding at doing something, and so they practice that. Research has shown that people who imagine working out in detail, going through the exercises and stuff, with compared to a control group, at the end of so many weeks of doing that, that person has more, their muscles are more developed than a person who doesn't do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And does everyone know the reason why we role play? Like whether it's in sales training or whether it's in a new work program, or why do we role play?
It takes you there.
It takes you there. And now I can actually elaborate a bit on that. Thank you very much. But the reason it takes you there is, have you guys ever seen somebody sucking on a lemon and all of a sudden your lips purse up? And you feel like you start to salivate, you start to, all of that type of stuff. So what that is it's an activation of what we call mirror neurons. So whenever a primate sees another primate doing something, you start to experience it. If you see somebody like a Rocky boxing movie, or you see people fighting, you start to feel that adrenaline pump and you start to feel pumped up. Those are mirror neurons. Your brain actually begins to experience that as if you're doing it, okay? So it releases all the same chemicals, it feels all the same emotions that you would feel if you were going through something similar. So the reason we role play is to activate those mirror neurons and make the brain actually experience it. It takes you there, okay? Does that make sense to everyone? All right, good. So let's move into section 2. We're going to talk about, this is how we talk about EMDR for lay people. So this is what you want to have lying around your office. This is what you want to, kind of the way you want to talk about EMDR to a layperson that doesn't understand clinical jargon, that doesn't understand all these different modalities. And so I'm just going to read this so that everybody kind of gets an idea. And if you want to fill in the blanks on the following section while I'm reading, please feel free to do that. This is just to get you an idea of how to talk about EMDR. EMDR, bless you, is a psychotherapy that enables people to heal from the symptoms and emotional distress that are the result of disturbing life experiences. Pretty simple. We could say that about almost all therapies, right? So repeated studies show that by using EMDR therapy, people can experience the benefits of psychotherapy that once took years to make a difference. And that this is marketed as a faster type of therapy, okay? And that has a lot to do with the modality not being about the details of the event, but being more about the emotional experience. And you can get through the emotions and tactile sensations that the details cause much faster than you can get through the details, typically, if that makes sense. Because there are always more details that we can extract from the situation, right? But they pretty much lead to the same feelings, the same emotions.
That, just for the therapist in general, back from your theory, that's why the whole field moved away from Freud's psychoanalysis, because they were focused so much on the details from the past and from your childhood, and it took years and years and years to get through therapy to resolve anything. And it was just taking so much time. Back then, the only people that were doing therapy were like the wealthy, the people that could afford to invest that many years. And so the modalities moved into more current modalities that deal with it more this way without focusing on all those details and stuff, because it's a lot faster in resolving the trauma, and it just opened up therapy in general to the greater population at large.
Well, what we found was there was this infinity loop that kept occurring, that the details would elicit negative emotions, which would elicit more negative details, which would elicit more negative emotions, which would elicit more negative details, and it was just a loop. It just kept going over and over. When they started getting into details, they'd feel the triggers, the emotions, and then that would bring more details, which would bring more emotions, and so it just kept being a loop. So rather than dealing with the details and letting them get stuck in that loop, just deal with the emotions, get those assessed, get those to where we can feel those differently. We can put those and compartmentalize them and desensitize from them, and then the details seem to not matter as much when they can't elicit those same emotions. The details seem to be rather insignificant. If they can't get me to feel that anymore, then really do they matter?
Wasn't that the whole point of going to therapy?
Right, yeah, that was supposed to be that over time it wouldn't hurt so bad. But what they found was that it continued to hurt just as bad. So because there wasn't ever any healing that came from it, they just keep reintroducing that same trauma, okay?
How do you leave out the details?
So we're gonna talk about that, but we just wanna focus on that right now, that's what these therapies do. They do leave out the details. Primarily, they're focused on another way of desensitizing and reprocessing other than talking out the details. But we are gonna get into that a little bit, okay? For sure. So it is widely assumed that severe emotional pain requires a long time to heal. EMDR therapy shows that the mind can in fact heal from psychological trauma much as the body recovers from physical trauma. When you cut your hand, your body works to close the wound. If a foreign object or repeated injury irritates the wound, it festers and causes pain. Once the block is removed, healing resumes. EMDR therapy demonstrates that a similar sequence of events occurs with mental processes. The brain's information processing system naturally moves toward mental health. If the system is blocked or imbalanced by the impact of a disturbing event, the emotional wound festers and can cause intense suffering. Once the block is removed, healing resumes. Using the detailed protocols and procedures learned in EMDR therapy training sessions, clinicians can help clients activate their natural healing processes. More than 30 positive controlled outcome studies have been done on EMDR therapy. Some of the studies show that 84 to 90% of single trauma victims no longer have post-traumatic stress disorder after only 3 90-minute sessions. And that's single assault, single incident. They had one thing. I had a client who was claustrophobic, afraid of elevators, and it was because she got stuck in an elevator whenever she was younger, and so it was one event, right? It only took one session with her, but it's pretty rapid.
As opposed to some of that like group with child abuse throughout their whole childhood and
Right.
multiple traumas,
Right.
that would take longer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Does it work for people who can't necessarily don't know what their trauma was? Like, what if you're claustrophobic but you don't know why?
Yes, it absolutely can. And it actually sometimes, in my opinion, can work better for someone who does just have emotions and tactile sensations that they, like panic attacks that they can't really explain. And the reason why is because, like you said, they don't have the details. So they really don't have much of a starting point. They just know the negative emotions and the negative sensations that they feel. So that makes it kind of easier to just deal with those.
Just to go back and touch on what you were saying about that wound and the block. You know, our bodies are designed to heal themselves, and that's both physically and mentally. You know, so physically, you know, your body's trying to heal, and if that block's not removed or something, you know, you're doing the same thing in your life that's causing something to have a negative view physically and stuff. That block's not being removed. That's lots of times when people, you know, end up going to the doctor or something to get a medication or something in some way to try to remove that block. Same thing mentally. We're designed, like your mind wants to be healthy, it wants to try to heal and stuff, and what happens is sometimes people, they just have a block and they don't know what that block is necessarily, and that's why people end up coming to therapists or counseling or seek some kind of treatment to try to resolve that, but what that's doing is just trying to remove that block to allow the mind to resolve that and heal.
Absolutely. Very good. Another study funded by the HMO Kaiser Permanente found that 100% of the single trauma victims and 77% of multiple trauma victims no longer were diagnosed with PTSD after only 6 50-minute sessions. In another study, 77% of combat veterans were free of PTSD in 12 sessions. There's been so much research on EMDR therapy that is now recognized as an effective form of treatment for trauma and other disturbing experiences by organizations such as the American Psychiatric Association, the World Health Organization, and the Department of Defense. Given the worldwide recognition as an effective treatment of trauma, you can easily see how EMDR therapy would be effective in treating the everyday memories that are the reason people have low self-esteem, feelings of powerlessness, and all the myriad of problems that bring them in for therapy. Over 100,000 clinicians throughout the world use the therapy. Millions of people have been treated successfully over the past 25 years. EMDR therapy is an 8-phase treatment. Eye movements or other bilateral stimulation. We've talked a little bit about some of the other bilateral stimulation, but we will be focused primarily on eye movements today. Most humans are visually, they're visually organized, and imagery is the most common form of eliciting emotions and tactile sensations right now, so we tend to have a tendency to focus on eye movements, which is why it's called EMDR and not some other bilateral system, right? These are all used during the part of the session. After the clinician has determined which memory to target first, he asks the client to hold different aspects of that event or thought in mind. Remember, we didn't have to necessarily get the details from them, we just need them to hold the details in their mind, okay, and know that they're experiencing it. All right, and after he has thought of mind, and to use his eyes to track the therapist's hand as it moves back and forth across the client's field of vision. About how fast would you say you typically like to move on that, on the bilateral movement?
Well, there's two different ones. One when you're trying to disturb the negative, that would be rapid, long.
Rapid, long, right.
You go.
Real far, you
But
want
when
real
you're
far
trying
movements.
to integrate a positive emotion, then it's short and slow.
Right, very good. After the clinician has determined this, as this happens for reasons believed by a Harvard researcher to be connected with the biological mechanisms involved in rapid eye movement, REM sleep, internal associations arise and the clients begin to process the memory and disturbing feelings. In successful EMDR therapy, the meaning of painful events is transformed. We're trying to transform the meaning, okay? Right now, the way the client or the patient is perceiving these events has a certain meaning, which is leading to certain emotions, certain tactile sensations. We want to change that meaning, okay? So change the meaning of painful events is transformed on an emotional level. For instance, a rape victim shifts from feeling horror and self-disgust to holding the firm belief that I survived it and I am strong. Unlike talk therapy, the insights clients gain in EMDR therapy result not so much from clinician interpretation, but from the client's own accelerated intellectual and emotional processes. You guys see the main difference on why we do it this way is because we're utilizing the client's own mental processes, their own intellectual and emotional healing process, rather than as the clinician trying to say, well, I think you should do this. And if you do this, it'll probably help you overcome that. Well, rather than that, we just do this process and the client gets there themselves. They change the meaning themselves, okay? The net effect is that the clients conclude EMDR therapy feeling empowered by the very experiences that once debased them. Their wounds have not just closed, they have transformed as a natural outcome of the EMDR therapeutic process. The client's thoughts, feelings, and behavior are all robust indicators of emotional health and resolution, all without speaking in detail or doing homework used in other therapies. Okay, so that's lay person, how we talk about EMDR to just the average everyday person, what it is, how it works, the studies that and statistics that go into why even to care about it, okay? Here's the treatment description. We're moving on to section 3 now. And at any time during this, if you feel like that you need a little more detail on how one would do that, okay, with somebody, please speak up and ask, because this is where we're starting to get into the actual process and the procedure of what to do whenever you're doing this, all right?
Let me jump in real quick.
Please do.
So for those of you who are therapists that know about systematic desensitization, it's kind of similar to that, but it's like a much more rapid process. When you're doing systematic desensitization, that's like if someone has a fear about something, and so you're going to have them come up with maybe 10 steps from a thought that they have that produces maybe just a little bit of anxiety leading all the way up to the full thing that they fear. And then you work through those steps one by one. You give them coping skills and stuff, techniques to deal with the anxiety they're feeling until they, get past that first stage, okay, and then you go to the next. This is similar to that, except that they're not having to spell out for you in detail what those steps are. They're just thinking about it in their own mind, and they're able to resolve it much quicker.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So EMDR therapy combines different elements to maximize treatment effects. A full description of the theory, sequence of treatment, and research on protocols and active mechanisms can be found in the study Shapiro, 2001, Eye Movement Desensitization Reprocessing, Basic Principles, Protocols, and Procedures. And EMDR therapy involves attention to 3 time periods. You're focusing on the past, the present, and the future, and you will do all 3 during these sessions. You'll focus on the past, the present, and the future, mostly trying to keep the person in the present. That's what the rapid eye movements are about, okay, is keeping them in the present moment. It's very, very hard to go and stay in a past moment when your eyes are moving rapidly, left to right, because, and you'll see this more whenever I go into the neurolinguistic programming, when we recall a memory, almost no matter what it is, we have a certain direction that our eyes will go and stay until that memory is fully recalled. And I could probably do a real brief demonstration. Kneale, what color shirt were you wearing yesterday?
I don't know. Brown,
See those eyes? You see where they tracked?
They went up here.
Right up here.
Yeah.
And they stayed there until he recalled it. Our eyes do that whenever we're trying to recall anything. They go to a certain place and stay there until we get it, and then it comes back. Okay? You'll see this a lot more now whenever you're talking to people. So whenever we're doing the rapid eye movement desensitization, they cannot recall that memory in detail the way that they could before. So if I had been doing that while he was trying to, it would have been much more difficult for him to recall it in the way that he did before. Okay?
So it basically like distracts you.
Yeah.
So, and that's the thing is when people have an issue, unless they're currently in that issue and continuing to relive that traumatic event, most of the times it's from a past traumatic event, and that's the point of focusing on the present and drawing them into the present. You're wanting them to recall that to an extent, but have them focus in the present. And that's a lot of times where people end up with their problems is they get trapped in the past.
Absolutely. Okay, we're going to go into the 8 phases That is the next portion. So section 4 now, we're gonna go through each individual phase, what you're doing in each individual phase, and try to get a good idea of what it means. Remember, this is just an introduction, so we probably won't go into great detail of what it would look like if I were sitting down with a client one-on-one and I were extracting from them the specific memory and different things. We're going to do a brief overview of how this works, and we gotta get through all 8 phases relatively quickly. So,
Do you want me to write it?
yeah, sure, that'd be great. So the first phase is history taking. History taking. This will look very similar to traditional therapy whenever you're doing history taking, okay? So history taking, you're assessing the client's readiness and developing a treatment plan. The client and the therapist identify possible targets for EMDR processing, and those targets would be triggers. So if I see an elevator, if I hear a baby cry, whatever it is, that's a trigger. We are identifying what is it that makes you feel and go back to that moment. What is it, what happens? So that's what we're doing, is we're identifying those targets, okay? These include distressing memories, current situations that cause emotional distress. Other targets may include related incidents in the past. Emphasis is placed on the development of specific skills and behaviors that will be needed by the client in future situations. So we talk about at that time, how do you want to feel? Like, how would you like to respond? And we start getting an idea of what a successful future looks like to the client, okay? And that way we're trying to make sure that we're implementing that all along the way in this therapy, so that eventually whenever we're going through it, we're able to say, so next time that you see this, do you see yourself being able to do X? Like whatever it was that they told us they want to do. I see myself being strong and confident, or I see myself being more empowered whenever I look in an elevator. So going through this, we're going to establish that along the way and go, now when you see yourself in the future, do you see yourself more empowered? Okay? So that's, at this time, we're going to get a model of what the client wants as an outcome. Do you have anything that you'd like to add there for phase 1?
Yeah, I mean, I had one client that, how would you like to feel? She had always felt negative about herself. She says, I don't know, because I've always felt negative.
Okay.
And it was really difficult for her to even know what normal would feel like.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing I accomplished in EMDR, we didn't finish because she quit, but for that one second, she said, oh, my problems are gone now. For a second there, she had a feeling of what it would be like, not to feel negative. So EMDR brings, it didn't last, but I mean, it's kind of hard to explain, but there are some clients that are just so down, they've never felt good, never ever, at least in their mind.
Right, yes. And a lot of that has to do with feeling degrees of happiness.
Right.
Degrees of happiness, and feeling like if I could be happier,
Yeah. Well,
then I'm not happy. If there's a potential that I could scale it up and I could be happier, then does that mean I'm not happy? That you have a lot of that with. And so whenever we're trying to get from them a model, it is important to get a successful model in phase 1 of what it's going to look like when I no longer have that emotional trigger. When I no longer have that negative association, what's that going to look like? And if you're able to get that from them, which you want to, you proactively want to say, what does a successful outcome look like to you? I'd like to know, what's it going to look like when we're finished and you're happy and you have the results you want? What's it going to look like? What's it going to sound like? What's it going to feel like? And you really want to get that in phase 1. Okay? Now, clients generally gain insight on their situations, the emotional distress resolves, and they start to change their behaviors. The length of treatment depends upon the number of traumas and the age of PTSD onset. Generally, those with single event adult onset trauma can be successfully treated in under 5 hours. That has been my experience. That's pretty consistent. Multiple trauma victims may require a longer treatment time, and that also has been my experience, two or three sessions for sure before we even start getting minimization of those triggers and those emotional feelings. And that's not always true. I have seen people get over it in one session. I've seen it where they were multiple and they really did overcome it in just one session. Okay, so phase 2. During the second phase, the therapist ensures that the client has several different ways of handling emotional distress. Do you remember what phase 2, what the actual name of it is? I can't remember what the name of it is, but what you're doing here is you're teaching coping mechanisms. Basically, safe spaces. Does anybody have something that you typically rely on, a game or counting to 10, something that you start to give right away as a coping mechanism for anxiety or anything like that?
I'm a counter.
A counter, so you count backwards from 10 or you count up to 10?
I count up.
Up, okay. Anybody else have one that you...
Focusing on breath.
focusing on breathing. Deep breath is a good one. A lot of deep breathing.
Finger touches.
Finger touches, okay, like counting to 5, 4, 3, 2.
Tension more so than anything else.
Okay.
The more harsh it is, then the more firm it is, and then if they're trying to get it, then it's more of a
Perfect.
to get them out.
Love that. Okay, so during phase 2, we're giving coping mechanisms, little things that the person can, focusing on breathing, counting to 10. That way, if they start to go into a panic attack, PTSD, if they're having any type of flashback during the EMDR treatment, we will let them come back to these self-soothing. And you can repeat any of these steps in the phase. So if you need to come back to 2 while you're already at 5, that's fine. Come back to 2, we'll circle back through, okay? So that's what you're doing here. The therapist may teach the client a variety of imagery and stress reduction techniques. Sometimes whenever we're doing the walking, which I love that, or the counting, I mean, we do walking along the beach imagery, imagining walking along the beach, imagining walking through a grassy field, anything like that. So you disconnect from that moment, you take them out of that past trauma, that pain, and put them into imagery that makes them feel self-soothed, calm, and they're able to get disconnect from that moment for just a minute so that they can calm down. Yes, ma'am.
And you have to be careful because what we presume might be a soothing place, you know, if that girl was raped on the beach.
Absolutely.
Walking on the beach isn't a
That's
soothing
probably
happy
not
place.
going to be what you want to elicit, right?
Right.
Absolutely.
And people, well,
Yes.
but sometimes they're directed and people don't think about that. And, you know, they're like, oh, well, okay, I want to try to give you an idea. And it's like, yes, again, you want to know enough to know what's not going to be the trigger.
What's very cool about this modality and all of these similar modalities is that it helps you start to identify that the brain, the body, it's wanting to heal. It wants to heal. The brain wants to feel better. So what you start to realize is that the person you're dealing with has an existing model in their mind already of a safe place, of something that's self-soothing, of something that's good. So a lot of times we're just extracting that from the client, from the patient. We're getting it directly from them. And so in phase 1 in discovery, that a lot of times is where I'll find, how do you want this to look? A lot of times I'll find, and do you have a safe place? Do you have some place in your mind that you like to go to that's kind of your happy place, where you always feel safe, always feel protected and connected to? A lot of times I'll do that in phase 1 so that I can introduce that in phase 2 in my imagery. So that's a very good point. Don't always try to find one thing that works for you and try to instill that in every single patient or client. It's much more powerful to extract from them what they believe is soothing, what they believe would be a successful outcome. We really want to get that from them, okay? The more you can get their specific language, their specific words, their specific imagery, the more powerful this whole process will be, okay? So the length of the treatment skipped back. So on phase 2, the client can use these during and between sessions. So the things that we're teaching them in 2, they need to know that they can do these themselves anytime they're with us or not with us. So they can breathe, they can focus on the touching, they can focus on the counting, going to a happy place, all of these things. We want to make sure that they know that they don't just have to do that with us. They can do this anytime on their own, okay? Yes,
It's
ma'am.
also part of that prep. By the way, I looked it up, phase 2 is preparation.
Preparation, okay,
But
cool.
another thing is a container exercise. So they imagine a container, and during the week they put anything in the container that they need to work on next week.
That's awesome. So,
And they get very descriptive. Several identify a Tupperware, and I said, well, you burping it? And they said, yeah. One gal went home and made her own box.
oh wow.
Yeah, so that's another, besides that safe place, is the container.
Did anyone keep a diary or does keep a diary, anything of that nature, journal? Okay. Anyone have a drawer that's like a junk drawer that's like you put all your little stuff in there? So a lot of times I'll give clients anything like that. Like if you have a private journal, then the stuff goes in there. Mentally goes in your private journal. If you have a secret drawer, anything that we want to talk about or we need to talk about, it goes in there and then we bring it out. You know, and what that does is give you separation, it gives you isolation from those events and gives you a place to compartmentalize them so that they're not so heavy to deal with all the time. So that's a really good imagery technique that I'm glad that you introduced, is that safe box, that safe space. A lot of times being able to have a mental avatar like that you can refer to in order to compartmentalize things is very, very helpful. Because just like with whenever you see somebody sucking on a lemon, whenever you role play, whenever you do that in your mind and you have that safe spot and you actually open that box in your mind and you put those things in there and you close that box, the mirror neurons activate and it takes you there. Your brain does that thing, and it actually remembers it, and on an unconscious, subconscious level, you operate from that belief that that did happen. Okay? And that's why that's so powerful. Thank you very much. That was great. Phases 3 through 6. In phase 3 to 6, a target is identified and processed using the EMDR therapy procedures. These involve the client identifying 3 things. So in phases 3 through 6, the first thing we identify is the vivid visual image related to the memory. So they right now have a visual imagery that's connected to the incident. We just need them to recall it. We don't have to know what it is, but they will recall it vividly. Okay? Now this is after they've already had coping and they've already come to the conclusion of the outcome, the successful outcome that they want. Okay? So we've already set that up first before we've ever gone into the trauma. Does that make sense? We have not let them go into the memory one time until we first identified the outcome that they want, successful treatment, what that's going to look like, and we've given them self-soothing mechanisms. Things that they can do, counting to 10, breathing deeply, touching their fingers, having a secret box where they can store things. All this type of stuff is things that we've given them prior to ever getting them to elicit the traumatic memory, the imagery. Okay? Now that we get it, then a negative belief about themselves. So that negative imagery has caused a negative belief about themselves. I'm not worthy, I'm worthless, I'm trash, whatever it is that their brain has generated, they have a negative emotion that brings about. Okay, we need to know what it is. So what is it that they're feeling negatively about themselves? Related emotions and body sensations. Now we need to know, what does this make you feel? The emotions, okay? Remember, we're not getting details. I still don't have any details about the event, what happened. All I know right now is that they know it, they have it in their mind, it's vivid, they are experiencing it. I know that they have a negative thought about themselves, what this made them feel about themselves, and I know that they're having negative emotions. And we're going to start mapping out and detailing those emotions and those sensations. I still have not gotten into the details of the event. Okay? We're all the way through phase 6, and we still, as the clinician, as the therapist, as the person working with a client or a patient, we still don't know necessarily any details of the event, nor do we need to yet. Okay? All right. So, in addition, the client identifies a positive belief. Okay? So that is a belief that they want to feel about themselves or they'd rather feel as a result of this incident. So we want to elicit that as well. If they have, I'm worthless, I'm trash. You remember earlier whenever we talked about the rape victim, she thought, I survived this and I'm strong. I'm a survivor and I'm strong. Now that's a positive statement about oneself. Rather than what she was feeling, we want to generate the opposite even. I'll ask people a lot of the time, what's the opposite of that feeling, that negative feeling? What's the opposite? What you would like to feel that's completely counter to that. And what I'll find is most people do have something on the tip of their tongue that's the opposite of what they're feeling. But it's so easy for us to talk about the negative feelings, and it's so difficult unless we're put on the spot to elicit, what's the opposite of that? What would be a positive feeling that would just be the complete opposite of that? And whenever people have to imagine that, what happens in the limbic system, whenever you begin to think about what it would look like if I were happy, if I were strong, if I were confident, you start to see those things in your mind, and it takes you there. Activates the mirror neurons, you begin to feel those things, and this is one of the reasons why this desensitization process is occurring, because they're constantly going back and forth from the negative emotion to the entirely positive opposite emotion. What would I want to feel? What would that look like? How would that sound, and how would I feel? So you're really, really messing up the limbic system. They're going back and forth. And they've only had one way that their limbic system has gone concerning this traumatic event forever. It's just gone one way. And what you're doing is you're disrupting that pattern. Okay? You're doing that through several different methods, and then you'll do it with eye movement. All right, so the therapist helps the client rate the intensity of the positive belief as well as the intensity of the negative emotions. How powerful do you feel like that this moment is in the EMDR therapy, where you ask them to, on a scale from 1 to 10, how strong is that negative feeling on a scale from 1 to 10?
Oh, yeah, that's really very important,
Why do you feel like that is an important part of the therapy?
because it's self-evaluating.
Correct. It's their belief. You're accessing really what their experience is, right?
Yeah.
And then by them connecting to it, by attributing a number, a numeric value to it, that becomes a real thing, a very real feeling, and it's on a scale from 1 to 10 on the negative belief, the intensity of it, the negative emotion, and 1 to 10 on the positive side. And
It's actually 1 to 7.
is it 1 to 7?
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
I don't know why.
Okay, yeah, no, well, so the scaling is 7 means you're all the way there, right?
For positive.
For positive.
Yeah, I
And
don't know
then
why
for
they
negative,
just-
it's, yeah.
Distress, yeah.
Right, so now we'll start to use bilateral simulation. Let me see. Did I skip ahead?
I may have gotten that from like numerology or like, even like in the Bible and stuff, when they describe something whole, complete and stuff, a lot
Well,
of
7
times
is
they use
supposed to be the whole
7.
number.
Mhm. Yeah.
So,
So after you have rated on a scale from 1 to 10 how strong the negative sensations are, how strong the positive sensations or beliefs are, after that the client is instructed to focus on the image, the negative thought, and body sensations while simultaneously engaging in EMDR processing. So using sets of bilateral stimulation. So at this time is whenever you begin to do the rapid, the eye movement bilateral, okay? And would you mind coming up and giving a demonstration really quickly with me on how you would do that, both for positive and for negative? Do you feel comfortable with that?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't have my notes in front of me, but.
Sure, no problem.
Okay,
So I'm playing patient.
well, just kind of summary, just tell me about, what you're here for.
Sure.
This is very.
Absolutely. Sure. So I have a issue where I really get worried anytime I see dogs.
Okay, tell me about that, when did this first happen? Or go back and tell me some experiences with dogs.
So probably started whenever I was about 5. I had an incident with a dog.
Okay, and, what would you, what were you feeling in this incident?
And so right now this is discovery, right?
Yeah.
So she's asking me what I felt she didn't ask me about the details. She didn't ask me what happened. She asked me what I felt, okay? So let's fast forward and say that you've gotten me all the way now to where you're going to do the desensitization. So just show how fast you would move the fingers.
Oh, okay,
And then,
got you.
and
So,
so at this point, this is where you go into the actual desensitization process. The person is experiencing it, okay? You have them thinking about the negative thought, the negative emotions, and then how would you do that?
Well, right before that,
Mhm.
what are you feeling about yourself about being bitten by a dog?
It's made me feel very scared, small, and weak.
Okay, and what would you like to feel about this?
I'd like to feel like I was protected, like that it wasn't gonna happen again.
Okay. What feeling would you want to? Right now, you feel like,
I wanna run, I get panicky, I start breathing fast,
Okay.
rapidly.
and so, what emotion do you feel about yourself from this experience?
Pathetic.
Okay, yeah, you want to try to get something, some emotion. They actually have a whole list of emotions you can haul out, okay? So what would you like to feel instead of feeling pathetic?
Empowered.
Empowered, okay, that's perfect. There you go, got that down. Okay, so I want you to follow my fingers, and I want you to have this feeling, I want you to feel this feeling of feeling pathetic,
Okay.
okay? And I want you to follow my fingers.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Is it okay if I move my head too?
You're not supposed to.
Very important, remember that.
Yeah. I did 24, by the way, back and forth. I want you to take a breath. Tell me what you're noticing right now.
I feel calm.
That's pretty quick, but.
So there's not a dog in the room.
That's right.
Right, yeah.
And I'm mostly making it up. I did have an experience with a dog, but
Right,
I'm over it, so.
Yeah, people will go on to, I remember my aunt, yeah, anyway. Okay, so on a scale of 0 to 10, where 0 is least distressing, and 10 is most distressing, how do you feel?
So when I think about a dog or right now?
Right now, about you being pathetic?
Okay. I feel like probably pathetic, I'm probably about a 2.
Okay, so I keep doing this until it gets down to 0.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we'll pretend this is 0. Okay, now let's take the positive cognition, I feel empowered.
Mm-hmm.
0 is, true, I forget what direction it is, I'll have to look it up, but anyway, 7 being most positive, and 0 being not. How do you feel on that?
About a 5.
About 5, then you go back and forth till it gets up to 7.
Mm-hmm. And you do it a little more slowly whenever you do positive?
Yeah, then you
Mhm.
go, I forget how many.
Right. So that is a basic, really fast summary of
Yeah.
what that looks like, okay? And what I loved about what she did was right before she started the eye movement, she got me to recall the positive belief that I'd like to feel about myself. So my last emotional state before going back into the negative was a positive, okay? Does that make sense? All right, thank you so much,
Yeah,
that was
sure.
very helpful.
Yeah.
All right, give her a hand, appreciate that. So then, we use these sets. These sets may include eye movements, taps, or tones. I am an auditory person myself, so I actually do better whenever I'm using auditory tones and a headset. There's a YouTube videos out there that make this really good, that you can actually put somebody on the monitor, have them put on the headset and go through a 3-minute EMDR where it has blinking lights on the left and right side of the screen, and it has the tones to go alongside of it, okay? And that is a free resource. Those are out there. If you would like a link to that, send me a message on this event page on the Eventbrite or on the Facebook, and I'll send you a link to that, okay? The type and length of these sets is different for each client. At this point, the EMDR client is instructed to just notice whatever spontaneously happens, which is what she started just asking me, do I notice anything? Do I notice anything different? After each set of stimulation, the clinician instructs the client to let his or her mind go blank. Go blank, okay? Allow it to go blank and to notice whatever thought, feeling, image, memory, or sensation comes to mind. And there is no right or wrong answer, okay? We're just wanting a reprocessing, all right? Depending upon the client's report, the clinician will choose the next focus of attention. These repeated sets with directed focused attention occur numerous times throughout the session. If the client becomes distressed or has difficulty in progressing, the therapist follows established procedures to help the client get back on track. That's going back through the phasing, okay? So we go back to phase 2. If they start to feel distressed, they start to feel uncomfortable, go back to the soothing, all right? We stop the session, go back to getting them feeling comfortable, feeling safe, feeling protected and secure, okay? And that's phasing through this. We can do this several times. If the client, when the client reports no distress related to the targeted memory, he or she is asked to think of the preferred positive belief that was identified at the beginning of the session. At this time, the client may adjust the positive belief if necessary. It happens quite often in my sessions that at the beginning, what a person thinks that they want to feel at the end, and then by the time we get to the end, what they actually want to feel has changed slightly. That happens quite often because the actual reprocessing and desensitization has created a brand new person. Somebody who's much more empowered, much more bold, much more confident, and they may have something that's even a step beyond what they thought they wanted. They may have just said, I just would like to see an elevator and not feel like I want to pee my pants. Well, then at the end, they go, no, I want to ride the elevator up to the 10th floor today at the Tulsa building, blah, blah, blah. And great, what would that make you feel about yourself? That would make me feel like a champion, you know, and it may be altered. So at the end, we want to revisit and make sure that we are instilling exactly the positive belief that they'd like to feel about themselves. Okay?
Like a lot of times, like with that, it's like if someone's in the dark and they're holding a lantern or something, they can only see so far in front of them. So they see at the end of that and they're like, oh, that's my goal right there, because that's what they can see. But then when they get there, that lantern, that light is showing further beyond that, and they're like, whoa, there's all this beyond that that I wasn't even aware of before. And so
Absolutely.
then their goals changed. And
Yeah, I actually like it whenever their positive belief expands and gets bigger and better at the end of a session. That to me is a kind of a win. Is exactly what you're saying, is that it shows and demonstrates that they already arrived at what it was that they wanted in the beginning. Now they want more, and that's really cool. At this time, the client may adjust the positive belief if necessary, and then focus on it during the next set of distressing events. Phase 7 is closure. Closure, phase 7. The therapist asks the client to keep a log during the week, kind of keep track of the sensations, the emotions. Did you have any of the, what did you notice? You know, you're really kind of trying to elicit not any type of negativity or positivity, just neutral. What did you notice? Just giving me back what happened over the past week. The log should document any related material that may arise. It serves to remind the client of the self-calming activities that were mastered in phase 2. Okay? So if that person is starting to notice that, yes, I did have this feeling and I counted to 10 and it seemed like it went away or it got better, those are all positive things because they're starting to actually utilize that session and the self-soothing tools in order to help themselves progress more quickly. Okay? So phase 8, the next session begins with phase 8. Phase 8 consists of examining the progress made thus far. Okay? The EMDR treatment processes all related historical events, current incidents that elicit distress, and future events that will require different responses. And if anybody wants to fill that out, that next section is all highlighted there and can be filled out. Does anybody have any questions so far on EMDR, how to do it, what the process, the 8 phases? Does anybody feel like that they wouldn't be able to find this information if they needed to? You going?
So for children,
Yes.
how young could you do with a child?
Neil, what would you say?
I'm not sure because I'm not certified in this. So
I think,
don't know how
and that's a good thing to point out. I typically don't really start working with children until they've developed theory of mind, ages 3 to 5, and they can linguistically be able to articulate well what it is that they feel like they're experiencing versus what another person would experience. That being able to separate and distinguish that I'm an individual and there are other individuals around me that make up the world is an important, for me, that's an important stage of development that has to occur before I work with somebody. So being able to identify, there's different little tools that you can utilize that I don't mind sharing, which help you identify whether or not the child has developed into that stage, because it's different for every child. But I had no problem doing this very, very young.
Quick Google says 5 to 6 years of age.
There you go. So that's about right. That's about as early as I would start to introduce this. But great question. The following page is a model of the EMDR process. It kind of gives you a visual. I'm not a very visual person. I'm auditory. Like I like to tell people a lot, so I included this for anybody that is visual, so that you can have something to reflect on and kind of let you know the process, what's supposed to happen, what's supposed to occur. Okay, so that's there for you to check out. We're going to go into my certification next, which is neurolinguistic programming.